Hello, everybody. Corrine Smith here again with episode 9 in this series where I talk about resources that you can use to study the life and writings of American author and naturalist Henry David Thoreau. And today's topic is quote books. We often say that Henry is probably the most quoted American author and the least read, because more people are familiar with his quotes than the actual texts of his books. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of books that simply contain selections from Thoreau's writings. I can't think of another writer that this phenomenon surrounds. Shakespeare, maybe, Mark Twain, maybe, but when you see the whole scope of this, it's just really enormous. Some quote books are general. Some focus on specific topics like plants or animals or education or science. Some follow the calendar and have entries day after day. Some are intricately and even stunningly illustrated. And since all of Thoreau's material is in the public domain, anybody can create a compilation of Thoreau quotes. You can do this too. I could do this too if I wanted to. Just read everything that Henry wrote in his major books, in his essays, his journal, correspondence, other stuff. Everything. Then pick and choose the passages you like or whichever ones adhere to your theme. It would be good to have a theme. Put them all together somehow, and there you go. Maybe you pair each quote with a very nice illustration, a piece of artwork. That would be nice too. Easy peasy. Now, not so easy in the past. As usual, an interesting history lies here. Again, my name's Corrine Smith. I worked as a librarian for many years. In the last 20 years specifically, I've done a lot of research on Henry David Thoreau and written a couple of books about him, Westward I Go Free, Tracing Thoreau's Last Journey, and also Henry David Thoreau for Kids, His Life and Ideas with 21 Activities for the middle grade and up. Currently, I serve as the supervisor of the Thoreau Society shop at Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. Say that 3 times fast. Anyway, this is my own series, and it's my own perspective of the history and the scope of these publications, coming not only to you as somebody who's used most of them, but also from a librarian's point of view of how useful are these really, okay? And all the books that I mention in this series and on this episode are in a bibliography on travelswiththoreau.com. You click on bibliography, which I really should probably make plural now, since there are 9 of them. And you click on that and you'll find quote books, and you click on that and you'll find links to order the books, to find them online, even if they're out of print, and you can try to find used copies. A lot of what I'm going to tell you today, you'll have to find used copies for. Now, in the very first episode of this series, I outlined 6 categories of books that you should get in order to create your own basic library of Thoreau's writings. And I recommended then that you get at least 1 quote book. Now, some people disagreed with me, which is fine and dandy. They said it wasn't necessary. Fair enough. I mean, sure, it's true. If you already have his books and an edition of his journal and some of the other stuff like correspondence, then sure, you already have the best quotes. They're embedded in the texts. Then again, they're embedded in the texts. I guess the questions you have to ask yourself are, when you are compelled to look for something that Henry said about a certain topic or in a certain kind of phrasing, can you find it with what you already have? Do you catch yourself paging through some of his stuff saying, I know he said something about that in here, I just can't find it? Or have you ever tried to search for one of those passages online, but you may not have exactly the right wording or some of the same phrasing, and so you keep coming up with whole pages of inaccurate results? If you even have the patience to go past the first pages of results? If these answers are yes, then you might need a quote book. Stop the madness. Consider getting a quote book as a ready reference, as we say in the library biz. Or as an inspiration, or because it looks and feels good, or just because you like it. All of these are valid reasons. Now, back in that episode, I showed you 3 current and general options. The cheapest one is from Dover Publications, and this is an older copy of it. The newer one is called Thoreau's Book of Quotations, slight title change, and has a blue banner across the top to match all the other Dover Thoreau books. Costs only $3. This is an older copy, but the contents are the same, okay? And then we've got Richard Smith's little one for Applewood Books. Richard, you may know, works at the shop, also portrays Thoreau as a historian. And so this fits into their series of quotations of famous people. And then what I call the mother lode, Jeff Kramer's The Quotable Thoreau. Lots of stuff here. It's the most you can get all in one place, okay? I keep this one on my coffee table for handy reference, especially when people ask questions on Facebook and say, where was that from? Or what did he say about that? Well, here it is, you know. To these 3, I will now add a brand new title that was just released, The Daily Henry David Thoreau, A Year of Quotes from the Man Who Lived in Season, compiled by Thoreau scholar Laura Dassa-Walls of Notre Dame University. Yes, she's the author of Henry David Thoreau, A Life, the biography that came out in 2017. So now she's got a daily quote book. Now, obviously, all of these books have different approaches, okay? Like I said, the Applewood book is a sampler of sorts, and it fits into their series. The quotable, like I said, is where you can find the most. The Dover gives you actually a lot of quotes for a few dollars, okay? And of course, the daily has 366 entries to entertain you, and you can read them whenever you want to, or you can hold back and space them out over a whole year. I wonder if anybody can really do that, though. But basically, if you want to use a quote book as a reference tool, then you probably want to consider a couple of factors. Here's the librarian kicking in here. First of all, how is it organized? These bigger ones, like the Dover and the Quotable, are by general topic. That's probably the best way to do it. And the better ones will have an additional index in the back. The daily obviously goes day by day, easy enough to figure out as an organizational thing, okay? The second question is, does the compiler give you full attribution for each quote? Do they say exactly which piece of writing the quote came from? These all do to some extent. The Dover doesn't give you the dates of the journal entries. It tells you it's from the journal, but as we know, 14 volumes of the journal published in 1906. How are you going to go find it? But at least it tells you the journal. Jeff in Quotable gives you all the credits. And why is that important to know where it came from? First of all, did Thoreau say it or write it? Because there's a lot of misquoting going on out there, especially online, as you probably know. And I guarantee you that once you get into this thing, someday you're going to want to know where it was, because you might want to go back to the original and look it up for yourself and see what he said around that phrase, or you know, in the paragraphs around it. So I think it's best to start with a collection that gives you attribution right up front, okay? And so anything that doesn't loses points with me, as you will find out in a couple of minutes. Now, if there are countless Thoreau books out there, how did this trend even start, with so much attention paid to pulling out passages from Henry's writings and sharing them with the public? Well, as I mentioned in the episodes about Thoreau's journals, this phenomenon really started with his friends. You know, after he was gone, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Bronson Alcott were known for borrowing Henry's journals from his sister Sophia, which is his first literary heir, And then they would read passages aloud to gatherings of people in their studies and their living rooms, parlors. And then in 1879, Henry's second literary heir, Harrison Gray Otis Blake of Worcester, one of his best friends, started reading quotes aloud at the sessions of Bronson Alcott's School of Philosophy, Concord School of Philosophy. Blake did this almost every year for the 10 years that the school was in existence. The one year that he couldn't make it, Frank Sanborn stood in for him and read them instead. And the people loved hearing Henry's words. If you go back to that journal episode, I quoted Eliza Elvira Kenyon of Plainfield, New Jersey, who was just bowled over by listening to Henry's words. So in order to meet this demand, Blake went through the journal because he had it, and he gleaned material for 4 seasonal volumes, spring, summer, autumn, winter. One first edition came out, and then this second edition basically was part of the 11-volume set, a Riverside set that came out in 1893. So Blake really set the stage for 2 things: for quoting Thoreau and for publishing the journal in some form. So like I said, go back to the journal episode to learn more about all of that if you want to. We really do owe a large debt of gratitude to Harrison Gray Otis Blake for doing this. Even though he didn't do a terrific job at editing, he set the stage. He really did. He really did. And he was one of Henry's best friends. So, of course, that 11-volume set of 1893 and then the classic 20-volume set of 1906 started the ball rolling to further grow Thoreau's public reputation. But even before, some of the more traditional and prolific scholars started publishing stuff in the middle of the 20th century, other writers got interested in promoting Thoreau too. If you go to a used bookstore, you may find a copy of The Living Thoughts of Henry David Thoreau, compiled by American author Theodore Dreiser. It was part of a series of quote books of a number of authors. Emerson was in the series, so was Tolstoy, amazingly enough. The small hardcover edition came out in 1939, so it's kind of early. This paperback was released, second edition, released in 1963. Dreiser is, of course, the author of the novels Sister Carrie and An American Tragedy. He also came to be known as a socialist, and he even joined the Communist Party before he died. Nevertheless, he thought well enough of Henry's writings to compile this early quote book. Dreiser must have owned a copy of the 1906 set, because in his 38-page introduction here, he says that he read all 2.4 million words that Thoreau wrote. He also must have read a decent early biography too, so either the one by Channing or Sanborn or Annie Marble or Henry Salt, because he does a nice biography here. And this is 1939 originally. Anyway, the rest of the book contains long quote passages. You can see how old this book is. They are arranged by general topic. There's a page here that says that he gleaned the quotes from A Week, Walden, the Journal, and Familiar Letters, which was Sanborn's volume, which is included in the 1906 set. But he doesn't say specifically where each quote comes from. So the book almost reads like a narrative. And I suppose that's an early quote book. It was good at the time, but again, he loses points for me for not doing attribution. Again, maybe the style at the time, just saying up front, this is where I got them, but not telling you where each individual one comes from. It just kind of reads like a narrative the whole way through. And another point's off for not having an index. Again, probably the style of the time. But it's funny. 1963, got a nice little picture of the Rouse image of Henry there. And as an enticement for someone to pick this up if they didn't know who Thoreau was, here's the enticement. Genius, prophet, madman, a fascinating study of one of America's strangest heroes. And that's how you promote a Thoreau book in 1963. Genius, Prophet, Madman, a fascinating study of one of America's strangest heroes. Okay. That's opposed to a book compiled by another American author, this time a nature writer, The Thoughts of Thoreau, compiled by Edwin Way Teale, with woodcuts by Michael McCurdy. First came out in 1962, and this is the 1987 paperback. Teale is, of course, the Pulitzer Prize winning author of North with the Spring, North with the Spring, Journey into Summer, and a number of other nature narratives. I think this is the first quote book that I ever bought for myself, and I still like it. It's out of print, obviously. Many subjects listed in the table of contents. Each quote tells where it came from. The print is nice. The feel is nice. There's an index at the back. It's a little deceiving about the Michael McCurdy prints, because there's that nice one on the title page that I showed you. And then there are small ones at the beginning of every chapter, and the small ones are all the same, and they look like this. If you look real close, that's Henry's Walden house with presumably Henry in the doorway. Kind of cool. Anyway, this was a nice one at the time. Like I said, this is the 1987 paperback. Writers were not the only ones who were inspired and influenced by Henry in the decades of the early 20th century. A nature photographer named Elliot Porter was too. And as he transitioned from shooting in black and white to shooting in color, he planned on creating a book that would somehow pair Thoreau quotes with his own intricate color photographs. This was not an easy project to undertake at the time in the late 1950s, early 1960s. You know, if you're more than 50 years old, like some of us, you probably remember that our school textbooks had only black and white photos in them, not color. My God, no, not color. Color was too difficult to do. It was too expensive. It involved much more technology than printing in black and white. And it still is more expensive to print in color. It still is more involved. Anyway, after considering some possibilities over the years, Elliot Porter finally found a willing collaborator in the Sierra Club of San Francisco. And so in 1962, in that 100th anniversary year of Thoreau's death, this magnificent book came out. In Wildness is the Preservation of the World. And of course, the title was taken by from which Thoreau essay? 1, 2, 3, let's say it, Walking. In Wildness is the Preservation of the World, with selected text by Henry David Thoreau, photographs by Elliot Porter, an introduction by Joseph Wood Crutch, who had written a Thoreau biography just after World War II and who was seen as an authority at the time. Remember, this is 1962 that this came out. Walter Harding's biography, Days of Henry Thoreau, was coming out the same year, so he was not yet the person to go to. And a foreword by eventually longtime president of the Sierra Club, David Brower. I have to tell you that I was lucky enough to have been in the same room with David Brower at some environmental conferences in the early 1990s. And I can tell you that when he spoke, everyone got quiet and listened. The man was commanding, and he was a major figure in the environmental movement. So this was in its essence not just a simple quote book. It was also a call for preservation of our natural resources. And it was not just another book in the terms of publications either. A lot of time and technology and money went into the process to make this book, which is hard to show you. And to make the colors look this vibrant in 1962. Are you kidding me? So it all came at a price, especially for the consumer. The initial limited time offer, introductory price for this book was $20. And after that, the price soared to $25. $25 for a book with just some words and some pretty pictures, even though they're beautiful, you know. By comparison, Theodore Dreiser's paperback, 60 cents at the same time. $25 for this book. And you know what? It's too big, you know, to put on a regular bookshelf. And you know, it's a browser. You know, you want to open it up and you want to digest, you know, the pictures and the beautiful photographs and the Thoreau quotes, and you want to be able to page through it like this and see them together. So it would be perfect if it could lie flat somewhere, you know, like on your coffee table. This book was groundbreaking in a number of ways, and it helped to continue to popularize Henry David Thoreau and his worthy stash of relevant quotes, just as we were entering into the crucial 1960s, when all of everything that he wrote about was coming to the forefront again, you know, nature, importance of nature, individual rights, civil rights, the role of government in our lives. Now this is an old used copy that I bought years ago, and you can see how tattered the dust jacket is. I got it this way. What you can't do is smell it from where you are. As I tell, it's musty, okay? It's been in a basement or an attic, but I felt the need to have it. And a friend had already given me a copy of it, actually, in paperback. 1967, it came out smaller in paperback. Hey, it'll fit on a shelf. How about that? So thanks again to Rich Tate at Bellwood Annis High School in Bellwood, Pennsylvania, to giving this to me, gifting it to me in the early 1980s. Thanks, Rich. So this was the first quote book that I ever had, because Rich gave it to me. And again, you know, 1967, colors, you know, I don't know how much this one was to begin with, but you know, it wasn't like all the other paperbacks. Now, because I wasn't sure that I wanted to show you my tattered dust jacket one, I ordered another copy of In Wildness is the Preservation World through our library system. So here's a fresh looking one. Isn't this beautiful? Beautiful. You know why? Part of the reason why it's beautiful? 1988. A 1988 reprint, and evidently there is a 1996 one too. So In Wildness is a Preservation of the World keeps on coming. It's like the Energizer Bunny. It is still setting the trend for what we now consider to be a standard coffee table book, and it is still furthering Thoreau's reputation and the importance of nature in our lives. So there are a lot of copies out there. Okay, I think you should have one. Here's another coffee table book. You know, once Elliott Porter set the trend, oh, there you go. You open up the door. This is In the Footsteps of the Artist, Thoreau and the World of Andrew Wyeth. Came out in 1986. You know the Wyeth family in the art world. Andrew's father, N.C. Wyeth, was a Thoreau fan, and he produced 10 paintings that appeared in the book Men of Concord. Yes, it's an illustrated Thoreau quote book from 1936, so it predates Dreiser. And it contains passages that Henry wrote about the men that he came into contact to and that he knew. And yes, N.C. Wyeth's paintings were reproduced in color here, but not with the crispness and the clarity that would happen a generation later with Elliott Porter. And this was expensive to do, again, at the time. So anyway, this big book, again, big book, hard to show you, features some of Andrew Wyeth's paintings, but also photographs of the photographers who put this book together, paired with Thoreau quotes, places where Andrew Wyeth was, and everything, like I said, everything paired up, you know, things about his life, Andrew Wyeth, they're connecting Thoreau and Andrew Wyeth, which isn't hard to do because you know why? Andrew Wyeth was born on July 12th, 1917, 100 years to the day after Henry. Connections, connections, connections. This one is big and unwieldy, obviously. Even on a coffee table book, it's kind of, big and unwieldy. And I guess I got it because I kind of like Andrew Wyeth. What I don't like here is that all the quotations, and I'm hoping I can show you this too, are all in capital letters. They're in all caps. That's just wrong. I'm going to say it. That's just wrong. Unless it's vital information or a warning posted on a sign, we humans do not need to see text in all caps. It's actually proven to be more difficult for us to read things in all caps. It slows us down. We need the natural ups and downs to visualize the letters so we can process them faster. So nice format, nice illustrations, loses points for me on the text, and it doesn't tell you where the quote's from. And even the page numbers are written out in block letters, like 22, 22 in block letters. You know what? After all of this, I don't think I need this book after all, now that I've looked at it with a discerning eye of a librarian and as a casual user. I mean, the visuals are nice, but okay. Anyway, continuing with the theme of artists who were inspired by Henry, we have Thoreau Country by Herbert W. Gleason, which was originally produced by the Sierra Club in 1975. And you say to me, hey, but Elliot Porter's was 1962 and it was in color and this is in black and white. Yeah, because Gleason shot in black and white at the turn of the last century. Okay. And if you're not familiar with Gleason's story, well, as a Thoreau person, you probably need to be, because he came a few decades after Henry, got into him, and started going around photographing all the places that Thoreau mentions in his writings. And he went back to the original places. He's a minister turned photographer. And Gleason's photos also appear in the 1906 set of Thoreau's writings. So if you have that in any form, if you have the original 20 volumes, or you have the Dover reprint, or maybe even other ones like the Peregrine Smith, it's Gleason's photographs that appear in those volumes. And so this Sierra Club publication from 1975 pairs Thoreau's quotes with Gleason's photographs. It's nice. Now, if you want to know more about Gleason, you don't know about him, please pick up the only biography of him, Taking Sides with the Sun by Dale Schwee, landscape photographer. Herbert W. Gleason, a biography. Fascinating guy, went all around, used to, in the early days, give slide presentations called Thoreau Country, and also produced images for national park books. So yeah, you might need a copy of Thoreau Country just for historical purposes. They do not age well, as you can tell. Inside's great. And again, a little aromatic. They don't age well. You can get a better copy than this one. And often in the annual Thoreau Society auction that we have online every March, often one of these will come up and it'll be in better condition than this, I guarantee you. So yes, you can find better ones out there. I mentioned Michael McCurdy earlier with the Teal book. His woodcut engravings have become classic Thoreau illustrations. Also among the handful of Thoreau-inspired illustrators is Abigail Rohr. I mentioned her when I talked about some of Brad Dean's books in other episodes, and she created this book on her own of woodland ponds, spring holes, and ditches, excerpts from the journal of Henry David Thoreau, with engravings by Abigail and an introduction by Bradley P. Dean. And this is nice. This one's the hardback. I don't think you can get it in hardback anymore. I know that the shop sells the paperback. Let's get to the title page for Abby here. Yeah, and you will find her illustrations in some other books too. Look how pretty. Yeah. So this is another one that you could have on your coffee table. And then there's also Roderick McIver and his beautiful watercolors, Thoreau and the Art of Life, which pairs his watercolors with Thoreau quotes. There's a newer version of this book that has a green cover and a different set of illustrations on the but it's Thoreau and the Art of Life by Rod McIver. All of these books obviously pair Thoreau quotes with appropriate visuals. So this is actually a category all its own. I probably should have made a separate episode for it. Let's move on to subject specific books. First of all, I should mention the books that have been issued by the Thoreau Society. In the 1990s, they had a little series like this, little paperback series like this. And so this is Elevating Ourselves, Thoreau on Mountains. This is Uncommon Learning, Thoreau on Education. There was also one on Science on Land and on Water. I think there were 5 out of print. You'll find them in used bookstores though. They're nice little books. They're nice little books. Obviously, they give attribution. No index, but they probably don't need to because they're all on a certain topic. What the Society has now are a series of 3 subject-oriented quote books that all look the same. So here's Nature's Panorama, Thoreau on the Seasons. Okay, so the quotes are arranged in seasons: spring, summer, fall, winter, and then spring again. Okay, and then there's Daily Observations, Thoreau on the Days of the Year, which goes day by day, like Laura's daily book. Okay, day by day. And then Bonds of Affection, Thoreau on Dogs and Cats. And there's a big chapter for dogs, there's a big chapter for cats. And then after that, they go in chronological order. Each one has illustrations by Barry Moser, who is another illustrator that does things for Thoreau books. And so yeah, we're lucky to have artists who've been so inspired by Henry that they want to contribute. Isn't that great? Okay, so yeah, Barry Moser is another person that you're going to run into. And so those are possibilities. Now, I am partial to nature-oriented quote books because sometimes I like to go out for a walk. I see something, and if I want to write about it and make a connection with Henry, then I want to find what he said about it. Okay, it's basic like that. You see a certain thing, you see a red-tailed hawk. Wow, in Concord, that would be cool. Yeah, well, you can do that a lot, actually. Sometimes one flies right over First Parish Church while other people are trying to talk during the Thoreau Society annual gathering. Anyway, yeah, wouldn't it be nice? You see something and you want to find exactly what Henry said about it right then and there. Okay. The index at the end of the 1906 journal is okay, but a lot of times it just doesn't cut it. It's not specific enough. Bradford, Torrey, and Francis Allen did a nice job, but they were probably limited for space too. So maybe that's okay. So I actually like 2 books when it comes to birds. I like 2 books that are called Thoreau on Birds, and they're by different people. One originally came out in 1910. This is the 1993 paperback edition, and it contains journal entries about specific birds. Originally compiled, this is compiled by Francis H. Allen. I just mentioned Torrey and Allen. They were the editors of the 1906 set. Okay, so this came out in 1910 originally, right after that. Francis Allen obviously wanted to do more, and he pulled out all the bird stuff, and he wanted to arrange it like that, which is cool. And so the chapters group birds into families like shorebirds, flycatchers, finches, owls. There are illustrations, these by Louis Agassiz Fuertes. If you don't know what family the bird falls into, there is an named index in the back, and Alan obviously gives you all the dates of the journal entries. There is even a third edition. You know, there was the original 1910. This is 1993. There's even a third edition of this book that was just released by Dover Publications in the last few years. It has a different cover. I don't have it with me. I will give you a link to it, though. It's a Dover book, Thoreau's Notes on New England Birds, Birds of New England. And it pairs up the quotes with Audubon prints. Okay, John James Audubon. So they went through and did that. So that's kind of cool. And they are in color in the book. I've seen it. So that's kind of cool. The other Thoreau on birds was one that came out in 1964 and was compiled by Helen Cruikshank. This is the one I prefer for some reason, probably because I got it first. I got it before the other one. And I'm not sure what guideline Helen followed to put her birds in there. They're sort of chronological by the journal, but once she mentions a bird, then she puts other entries about that bird in there. Anyway, the strength of this book is in the we're talking detailed index, and in something as an appendix called an alphabetical list of Thoreau's birds. An alphabetical list of Thoreau's birds. Because sometimes Henry was colloquial when he would write about a bird. For example, he didn't call bald eagles bald eagles. He called them white-headed eagles, which is easy enough to figure out. But do you know what a belcher squelcher is? According to Helen, a belcher squelcher is an American bittern. Okay, this is handy. This is a handy guide, because then when you know the real name of the bird, you can look it up and then you can find, this, yes. So this turned out to be an invaluable reference for me. Like I said, once you know Thoreau's shorthand, you can figure things out a little bit more. But that's also kind of the fun of it, isn't it? To know that he had, you know, he often just made up names for things the way it sounded, like belcher squelcher. Well, of course, of course, bittern may sound like that to him, you know? Oh, well. Now, it's not a quote book, but I'd like to mention this again. I mentioned in the second journal episode that I use Rayangelo's Botanical Index to Thoreau's journal a lot. First came out in 1984 in paperback as an addition to that Peregrine Smith reprint of the 1906 set of the journals. Now it is available for free. This is available for free online at Ray's website, www.ray-a.com. And you can put Thoreau bot in after that. But actually, when you get to the first page, you'll see it right on there. You'll see it right on there. Invaluable, because he indexes all the plants. And we're talking from little wildflowers in the spring to trees. Indexes all the plants mentioned in the journals by common name, by scientific Latin name, and if the Latin names have changed between when Henry used them and now, he puts that in here too. And he updates it online. It's wonderful. Paperback is rare to find. I am lucky to get one. You're going to have to probably go online and get his stuff online instead. Then we have two books compiled by Jeff Wisner. Thoreau's Wildflowers and Thoreau's Animals. Thoreau's Wildflowers came out in 2016. Thoreau's Animals came out in 2017. Thoreau's Wildflowers, again, features the illustrations of Barry Moser all throughout the book. And Thoreau's Animals has illustrations by Debbie Cotter-Kasperi. And both of these books progress through the seasonal year, the calendar year. So they start in March and go to February with journal entries, okay, that talk about specific plants or animals, obviously. Both have really good indexes. These are nice books. Especially if you want to go through the calendar year, see what Henry's seeing on the days that you are out seeing things. I have to admit that they're not quite what I was looking for. And Jeff knows this. I think I've told him this. I would rather have something like Thoreau on birds. Really? Can't we do that with animals and other things, where you just have a chunk of of room, and you say, this is what he said about beavers. You know, he never saw a beaver. This is what we saw. This is what he said about. I can't even think of anything now. This is what he said about skunk cabbage, which turns out to be the hero of Thoreau's Wildflower book. This is what he said about skunk cabbage. Then I'd have it all in the same place. That's what I want. Okay. Now, Peter Lauer sort of did this in Thoreau's Garden, Native Plants for the American Landscape. He sort of does this. He has chapters that he has his own illustrations. He goes through plant families, has some Thoreau quotes. He puts his own narrative in there too as an explanation. So this is not really a quote book in my book because that's not all it has in it. But the way he addresses it is that way. Loses points for me for not having an index. But so that's what I want, guys. Okay. Something that's animals, something that's plants, that's a book. Okay. I know that the Walden Woods Project has indexed the journals for those kinds of things, and they're going to put it online, but I want a book. Okay. I want a book. However, if you want trees, whoa, if you casualty of using too many books here. If you want trees, well, then, yeah, you've got an option. Thoreau in the Language of Trees by Richard Higgins. Rich brought this out in 2017. Rich is also a photographer, so a lot of his black and white photos are also in here. He has a narrative at the beginning, and he has sort of subject-specific chapters, and then he has a couple of chapters that are species-specific, pines, elms, and oaks, and also the way trees look in winter. So if you want that kind of approach, there you go. Thoreau and the Language of Trees. There's an index. It's kind of general, but this is a good starting point for trees. And then lastly, away from the nature books, if you want something totally different and yet totally appropriate and something that you may not find in traditional bookstores, I highly recommend this one. And I'm not going to say the name out loud because I don't want to risk my audio getting censored. But there's this book. You know, Henry was darn funny at times. And a lot of people don't recognize his humor or don't appreciate it or don't even realize that he's making fun of himself in almost everything he says. Except for M. Allen Cunningham, he has. And so he brought this book out a couple of years ago. And he has a great introduction here, a personal story that a lot of us can relate to. And then he's got excerpts from all of Thoreau's writings showing examples of his humor. He has, he does not have an index, but he has titles for all these excerpts that are kind of fun. And so it's a really nice table of contents. It's an extensive table of contents. And in this case, I don't know what keywords you would choose to make an index out of it. But yeah, so I recommend this book by M. Allen Cunningham. Maybe it's one that even your coffee table would enjoy, huh? To entertain your guests. It's not readily available, though. I can admit that. As I am recording this episode, the shop at Walden Pond does have copies in-house and online. But act fast. Why not? Henry was a funny guy, and we know this, don't we? Yes. So again, the most current ones that I'm going to recommend to you are the Quotable Thoreau, and that's got the most stuff in it. And, you know, then Laura's daily one, if you want the day by day, okay, and brand new. And, you know, because I also think you ought to get In Wildness is a Preservation of the World. This is a book that in many ways made history, and not everybody knows that anymore. But again, there are so many Thoreau quote books out there, and maybe I didn't mention your favorite, okay? And if you want to look for one of these beyond what I've shown you, again, keep in mind, what do you really want, or what do you really need? How do you want to use it? How is it organized? Does it tell you where the quote came from? If it doesn't, did he really say it? Where can I find it? And then again, you may decide that you don't really need a Thoreau quote book at all. And of course, all the books that I mentioned here on a bibliography, Thoreau Travels with Thoreau.com, and give you links so you can find them. So that's what I have to say about that. But again, there's so much more out there. And what a great thing that so many people want to share what Henry David Thoreau said, you know, keeps supporting the fact that he's still as relevant as ever. Thank you again for joining me here on this episode of Studying Thoreau. I hope my comments are helping you. Remember that if you can't find the exact quote book that you want, maybe that's the universe telling you that you should create and compile it yourself. But I can admit, I'm not the one who wants to truly do the animals and the plants in a book in chunks. Anyway, my next topic will be biographies. Yes, over the years, a number of biographies have been written about Henry. I have a feeling that folks out there already have their favorite ones too, so this one could get interesting. I also have a feeling that you already know which ones I'm going to recommend in the end. Anyway, in the meantime, feel free to subscribe to this channel with the red button, ring the bell in the top right to get new material. You can also click on the thumbs up if this was helpful to you. Write a comment. I will see it. I will probably reply, or I'll probably like it. And then next time, biographies. Oh boy. Until then, I'm Corrine Smith. Take care, everybody.